I am extremely honoured to have with me the photographer, Simon Devitt. Hello, Simon.
Hi, Sandy. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
And as lots of you know, Simon is based and comes from New Zealand, but today you are in Helsinki in Finland. Why is that?
I'm here largely to deliver 3 workshops with a photographer, compatriot, and all-round nice guy, Mike Kelly. He's the American version of me, if for those who don't know Mike, but many of you will. And we get along very well, good mates, and we've always got lots to talk about. And pre-COVID, we decided we'd like to do a workshop together. And then, of course, that had to be shelved. Post-COVID, we both got very, very busy again very quickly. So we decided that no time is a good time. So we advertised the workshop, Mike having been to the location in the archipelago in a place called Uru. And within half an hour, 3 workshops had sold out. So we decided that's probably quite a good thing for him and I to do. And here we are, finally. It's come about as these things seem to do. Time goes quickly, and here we are.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that you're giving me a slice of your time today to talk through your work and your history as a photographer, but also, of course, being a photographer is being a human. So I was blown away with your generosity, actually, that you sent me photographs from your family album. So that we could talk a little bit. Sometimes I think people are very aware of a photographer's photographs, and there can be a bit of a disconnect between the person who's been in that place making that work, the image, and who they are. So this is your platform to tell us where you're from and who you are.
Beautifully put too, Sandy. Thank you for articulating that so well. And there is a deeper connection between my practice as a photographer and how I see it. And the photo you're looking at now is a great example of, like many other family photographs that we all have in our albums, or most of us will have something akin to this. And for me, the family photo sits at the very center of my practice as a photographer. And the reason for that is my dad, who you can see in this picture, was a huge influence and continues to be. He would take with us on family trips and moments where we lived out of New Zealand in the United States. He would take an SLR loaded with slide film wherever we went. So what that ended up being was a series of family slideshows, projected onto the wall, for us all to look at each other and ourselves. And it's one of those very rare, special for me, moments with photography where it is quite social, and we all get to engage with this beautifully projected image on the wall. Some kids might be bored by that or disinterested, but I was just completely in awe. And still to this day, the projected image is something I really love. And seeing family photos, especially, where in one sitting, one view, we see each other of that time in that place, and our ability to compare and see and gauge, and remember is really poignant, I think.
As someone who also grew up watching things like cine film projected onto blank walls, I'm interested in the idea that space kind of reconfigures to photographic or light-based mediums. And I mean, your work as an architectural photographer is, would you describe it as reconfiguring space, or are you kind of trying to embody truth, something that is really there?
That can be quite layered, and the truth part's interesting because I think for a long time photography would get labeled with the moniker of telling lies, but I think photography creates a new truth in that moment, in that time, with that view, that perspective. And I think my interest in photography largely stems from seeing things the way my father would see them, perhaps. And then as a young child traveling around in the back seat of a car, typically looking out the window, seeing how we all lived and where we worked and what play looked like. So it's, my view is very much from a sociological, anthropological perspective on how we're doing, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what that all looks like as pictures, as picture stories. And so, yes, a photographer of architecture, but more than that, I really see myself as a photographer.
Yes, and I mean, I've read about you that you do, as you said a moment ago, actually, you put these kind of family portraits or family at the center of practice, and capturing images, and thinking about you with the projection on the wall, togetherness, looking at photographs, how bizarre that might be for some younger viewers or listeners to think about engaging with photographs of people they know, not celebrities, on a large scale that's not on a phone screen or on a monitor on a computer or a laptop. In terms of scale and scaling to, I guess, like the age in which we live, as a younger photographer, did you have a sense of where photography might go, and how does that match maybe with what is taking place now?
I think on the periphery, there are many things that have changed that none of us could have imagined or predicted, and that in itself is quite lovely and it has added to the surprise and the way in people have to photography, and we've all been, for a long time, we've all been photographers, from the early days of the box brownie making photography popular to most people, to a lot of people. And then more recently, cell phones, smartphones becoming and adding to that mass of images that appear in the world.
How early on did you appreciate yourself as a photographer?
Oh, I think it took quite a while. That imposter syndrome is quite real.
Well, you mentioned the teacher actually had started to help you before you left high school. There was a sense that somebody in addition to your dad, who modeled, I guess, being a photographer or making photographs, then you also had somebody who perhaps guided you or set you on a path.
Yeah, Robin, my teacher in the sixth and seventh form for photography, was a huge inspiration in taking that, what was very much in the home in a family setting, out into the world, and someone else shining a different light, creating a different inspiration, and giving that other level of self-belief that's really important. And I think it's those teachers that do have that huge effect, that huge influence on us, and we've probably all had one, or hopefully we all have had one at least along the way, and they live long in our memories, and they had a huge part in that early influence, and I know Robin did for sure.
When you look at these photographs, again, very kindly, generously shared with me, do you remember from these snapshot moments how you were as a photographer at these times?
Oh, it's, they're just indelible, aren't they? That for me, they're imprinted on my soul, and I remember them like they were yesterday, and I remember the kind of young man I was in those photos too, and exactly where I was, how I felt. And pictures have that power, photographs have that power.
Yes.
Self-portraits, as these are particularly, I think, can do that. And they perform differently to a family portrait. They look almost like they should be related, but I think they're very different.
Well, photographs, and again, you've used this word yourself, I speak it a lot to my students, is, photographs are transportation. We are taken often or placed we're certainly privy to something that we otherwise might not be. Hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've given me Eels, LA, what is it, Eel's Nest?
Eel's Nest by Simon's Story, anonymous
A
architect.
lovely Porsche at at the bottom there.
Thank you. He's such a wonderful human, Simon, and a terrific architect.
Mm.
He's been in Los Angeles now for a very long time. He studied there, but he is a Kiwi. All his stories as an expat are from the 80s, so it's quite funny when I talk to him that all his experiences and his nostalgic episodes are from a time capsule. Speaking of time capsules, again from the 80s, and photos like this, they always deal with the past. They live in the past, and this is quite a lovely moment with Simon in the center of the picture, who lived in this house. He's since built a new house in a different suburb that I'm about to go over and photograph for him. And it's very much a neighborhood that was on the turn. So he was sort of the beginning of a gentrification in that neighborhood, and he became good friends with everyone around him, who were often, from all walks of life, and became his sort of neighborhood watch when he wasn't there, or looking over him and his gorgeous wife. And I remember once he needed to go up into in a helicopter for some reason, and he took a couple of the neighbors with him who would never have had that opportunity or experience before. And from that moment, he had a neighborhood, he had a community around him, which I love.
I do wonder about, a lot of the places that you've been to as a photographer who photographs residential spaces. You're going to very, very beautiful, considered um, landscape built environment. I'd like you to, if you can, describe the tolerance and tension between notions of community, but also with the elite. So, here, in fact, I think it was possibly about this. You have written that, there were lots of nosy neighbors who came and were like looking in your viewfinder, and they wanted to find out. There was like an informal neighborhood watch, so to speak. Often wider communities feel quite detached or disconnected from places or spaces of what might be like an elite or wealth, basically. I'm looking at that for you, that this kind of tolerance between community and the elite. You do.
There's the perception when a camera shows up that varies significantly from place to place. And so standing out the front of a house in a neighborhood, I think it wouldn't be determined on what the house is, just that it is a house that a neighbor might come out and ask, oh, they're selling up, are they? So everyone thinks then that the house is for sale. If I'm on the side of a street, people would automatically assume that maybe I'm a speed camera or taking photos. So people would speed up or slow down or give me the fingers or yell out or say hi. Or and then in a commercial environment that also has a public facing aspect to it, people will assume that they're going to be on the news. So you get these different perspectives and perceptions of what photography is and how it's being used. And it's the beginning of a conversation, and sometimes it's very brief. Other times it draws people in to tell their own stories and their own experiences about photography, which I love. It's a leveler, and it's a very democratic sport.
Yes. What is the difference, though? You mentioned now, everyone has the capacity to take a photograph. We have these extraordinary cameras just in our pockets. What's the threshold at which somebody becomes a photographer proper, or would you do away with such a term?
I've been giving this a lot of thought. I have given it a lot of thought over a long period of time, and
Mm.
something I've landed on recently, and I was talking to Mike this morning, Mike Kelly, workshop planning and scheming, and I said to him that I think, there's a sort of a barometer from someone who might show up at a festival concert with their iPhone, and I think there's levels of being present or not
Yeah.
with a camera. And I think if you're as you might call it, a proper photographer, the intention when you pick up the camera is to be as, incredibly present. And I don't know of any greater mechanical device that makes me more present than a camera when I pick it up.
But isn't that
And
the
so,
irony of being a photographer, actually? I know I'm
yeah.
jumping a little bit in my question, but
Mm,
you've already talked about photographs are all in the past, and I speak frequently to many different people about all records being dead things.
mhm,
To be present simultaneously with that which is the past.
mm,
It's a very
yeah,
bizarre, a bizarre place to be, no?
it is. It creates an energy like immediately because of that. There's a resonance and an alchemy. And I think we relate to, and it's interesting, you brought up Brassai's images in Paris, which were a really huge early influence on me. There's an alchemy in photography that we relate to based on its chemical past in the darkroom. But I think because we really, don't really have that now, for me, the alchemy that's really present in the photographs I take is that there's no greater alchemy than beginning the life of a photograph. And it's a little bit like, you've offered up these ingredients, you've put yourself in that moment, in that time, in that place with your camera, and you've become present to create the past in that immediacy that you mentioned. But somewhat like a garden, you don't make a garden, you start a garden, you start the life of a photograph, and that's where the greatest alchemy in photography is, I believe.
Yeah.
Mm.
When we look at those people that are our heroes, and we consider that each of these images has given us part of our life, when you make work, are you aware of that when you take photographs, that you're giving not just new life to spaces for people to admire, perhaps, or
Mm.
for architects to reflect on, to feel proud,
Mm.
but that you're also giving a chance to anyone to experience something?
Yeah, I think at a very, at first principles level of photography, which is something I come back to a lot when I'm teaching, either at university or in workshops, particularly with professional photographers. As time has gone on, there can often be distractions that move us away from those first principles of photography, you know, being playful, being an explorer, being joyful. All of those are really fundamental, I think, in being a photographer. And so I teach a lot about that.
Do you think that teaching, we're going to talk more about your
mm,
mentorship and the prize and
yeah.
being an educator in a different slide almost, but it seems opportune now to talk about it. Do you
Mm.
think that being an educator has given you a better language as a photographer?
Oh, I think so. And I'll come back to what you're saying just before very quickly is that um, the basis of architectural photography, if you like, is that particularly in residential architecture, someone's dream has come true.
Right.
And I'm very mindful and present of that when I show up at whatever level. And that might be um, social housing, where it's not actually their house, but it is their home and it is still their dream. So it's dreams at various levels.
Mm.
And that house isn't going anywhere, whether that's been designed by an architect or a draftsman or built just simply designed by a builder. but the pictures can, in the viewer, can show in some way, even subtly suggest how it felt to be there. And often the photographs will last longer than the buildings themselves. So it's a really important relationship between that place, or the making of space and place, the spirit of a place, and the photography that's able to record that. And so it's suggestive, it's ambiguous, and it's a lot about storytelling with images that I
It's a
am
very
very
curious
mindful of.
line, isn't it, for a photographer to tread between something, making something that has almost like an intention of ambiguity, and something that is instructional about where one might be, or what one might or could feel.
Yeah, it's a very
There's
tight line. It is, yeah.
no disagreement with me in terms of what you're saying, and I really relate actually to that sense of this fine tightrope between these almost like binary aspects of ambiguity and the obvious, or
Mm,
the
mm.
instructional and the oblique.
Yeah. I think if we are just dealing in description, which cameras are very good at, unless we intervene, then we just have description.
Well, this photograph of the cafe, apparently one of the best cafes in the whole world, I was reading, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's because of because of the cafe, or because of the place, the position, the architecture, maybe all of it. Uh, Tell us about engaging with spaces.
Um, I, I think it might, it's never one thing, is it? It's to do with lots of different ingredients or reasons or motivations or inspirations. But one for sure is that when I started in photography, it was large format transparency film, and there's very little latitude for error. And so you kind of work hard to maintain the balance of being in the moment at the time and not fucking it up. With slide film, you can't really get it wrong, but you still want to be present, be in the moment, available for that chance encounter, whether it's a large format camera or a 35mm camera, that you can work at quite some speed with. And so I'm quite used to wanting to get the shot at the time in that moment, and not really, I haven't really changed that way of looking or reacting or responding with the camera. And so with a digital camera, in post, there's very little that I'm doing afterwards.
Well, I mean, things like color for you. You have given me a black and white image of yours to show, but it was almost as if it was a kind of like an anomaly, really, because I'm used to seeing color and being struck by color in your work. I think I've got the Egglestone next, actually. Is Egglestone a color informer for you?
Yeah, my first interaction with his work was his black and white, very early images. And then the dye transfer process with his color work is very much him almost, controlling and layering in the color in that old process. And it's remarkable that there's a particular palette, almost like Kodachrome had its own particular palette, that he's created in his own way to enhance his own language as a photographer.
Is color something that you almost deliberately and specifically commune with, though, in a space or a place?
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, for me, and this image is a good example. It's just, I'm just doing enough. I'm not interested in putting too much of my mark on the scene, or changing anything, or turning lights off, or sometimes turning them on. It's really doing doing just enough really with the scene at the time.
I'm just
And
gonna read something here. Egglestone aimed to describe his surroundings through photography, passing no comment on the virtues or flaws of his subjects or spaces.
mhm.
Which seems to align perfectly actually with what you're just saying.
Yeah, I hadn't read that. It's a lovely quote, and it does describe his work beautifully, and certainly reveals, I think, a big part of my intention.
Well, I was going to say that's my another question I'd been thinking of to do with your work is about and I'm sorry to always put things in such binary terms, but passive or active.
Mm,
You write and speak a lot about being still,
mm,
waiting for
mm,
something almost to like yield or reveal itself.
mhm.
Is that waiting in that stillness, is it actually an active thing or is it a passive thing?
I think it slides in between both, and it's where silence lives, because we are able, our ability to compare is really important, and I liken it a little bit to the mindset or the mindfulness of understanding what music is because of the silence between the notes and sitting there. And I think that's at once passive and active. And sitting still has a lot of power in it. We're often moving through spaces we're transitional most of the time. We're kind of in order to most of the time. So we're bringing that energy to most things. And I'm very mindful of that in any given moment, particularly when I pick up a camera and I'm on a site at, in a space with people, may not be with people. And there's always something happening, and it's alive. So I prefer the space of the observer and sitting and watching, which often means and it feels like a democratic space, and it feels like in those elevational views that I often sit with, that it's allowing the viewer to sit alongside me in that time and in that moment, and perhaps share with me how it felt to be there. It's an invitation.
I was very interested to find out that there was an element of reluctance on your part to engage with moving image.
Mm.
And the idea that we are always in transition, we're always moving, and
Mm.
actually much of your work, similar to perhaps the people you've cited as your inspiration, is cinematic in a way in
Mm.
quality. It has a narrative presence, it's got a very vibrant life within it, even when it's very still seeming.
Mm.
And I watched, is it the Waterfall House?
Mm-hmm.
Waterfall Bay House, moving image by Bosley Architects.
Mm.
And the thing I particularly noticed is that your moving image shots are essentially still.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I was quite challenged by the fact that camera manufacturers decided that cameras should have both features on the
yeah,
one beast, if you will, and for me that suggests that they're closely related, stills and moving image, but they are not. They are distant relatives for sure.
mm.
And so treated appropriately, I think, having a sense of occasion with each is important. So the
Do you
reluctance
see
is
them as
kind of a, sorry.
like do you see yourself though as multidisciplinary at all?
Um, Not really. I think they're born out of the same intention, and my reluctance led to attempting a way to have the moving image that I shoot and the stills sit together and enhance each other in a way that they could still live together and help each other rather than be two separate things.
How do you reconcile your life as an internet Instagram sensation comedy genius, comedy curator,
Mhm.
with your life as a formal photographer, if not proper photographer.
That's really interestingly put. Thank you, Sandi. I was always, I think, the kid in class who would get the command by the teacher to get out. I would always be, I wouldn't say I was a class clown, but I certainly didn't ever take things too seriously. And having been self-employed now for a very long time, it can all be quite serious, and architecture all by itself can be quite dry.
That can be very austere, and that's what's always amused me rather about being amused by
mm,
you,
mm,
because there's these austere, sublime, transporting images of places.
mm,
And I don't mean to use those words in any way to diminish, but rather to elevate. But then there's also this what might seem to be another thing, but actually is it another thing?
mm,
Is
mm,
humor and vivacity and appreciation of the absurd, is that
mm.
actually all part of being able to be present, of being aware, of being alive, and letting the photographs live their own life?
It is completely that. Thank you, and beautifully pointed out the how two things can look completely different, but be exactly the same.
Mm.
Um, and we struck a time in late 19, early 20, early 2020 with COVID, and it sort of felt like for a lot of people that the world was ending, and we needed to take ourselves less seriously, or at least be able to laugh at things. And that was really the beginning of a lot of the memes that I have been collecting over a much longer period to show up on my stories on Instagram. And the feedback was immediate and substantial, which has led to pretty much where things have got to today. So I'm not allowed to stop doing this anymore. That's but really, for me, it's laughter is the absolute essential in life, along with breathing. So it's really where everything begins.
And do you find that when you engage with your students, for example, in the
Mm.
university setting, that you use humor to guide them?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a love. Photography is a mirror to our own lives. And as soon as we pick up a camera, we're literally picking up a mirror. When we pick up a camera, anything we're confronted by, we're immediately confronted by also when we pick up the camera. So there's a mirror to life, and looking through the lens that I think is really at once can be quite a serious thing, but it can also be quite a funny thing. And the very beginning of my lecturing at university, the first lecture room that I was given was a very big lecture theatre that could have easily held 500 people, and I had 32 very keen third-year architecture students with their cameras in hand, walking into a massive space, and I somehow got a hold of the audio system and had some classical music blasting as they walked in. So I don't quite know what they thought they were going to get, but it wasn't anything conventional. So it was from that point that I think I started learning a lot about delivering and communicating all of the important things around photography that that I love, including taking life less seriously.
Do you ever worry, though, that in teaching so well to see life through a lens,
Hmm.
that you're teaching people to stop actually living in the moment?
I think picking up a camera does that all by itself. It does put you more in the moment, more in life. And I think if life is appreciating and getting some distance from ourselves at certain points, that's a great gift. And a camera at its best can do that for us, for sure. Those moments are special, and I've managed in my time to experience that a lot, and I'm eternally grateful for that. So if I can share that possibility with people when they pick up a camera, then I feel like that I just feel blessed, with
Well,
that.
I've used the word generous a couple of times already to describe you, but I do always consider that there's a generosity in making images.
Yeah, I think particularly today that we're dealing with data that often ends up as pixels on a hard drive, and photography and its intention, its purpose is to be printed either in a book or framed and hung on a wall, or simply blue tacked to a fridge. But it's intended to be shared. It's intended to be two-dimensional. We often are clearly using it on to display on monitors on our phones, and not to suggest that that's a bad idea. It's amazing, but I think we should be able to distinguish what I would call fast food from slow cooking. And I think anything that's thrown at us on a screen, on Instagram, on websites, on TV, that's absolutely fast food. And then slow cooking is more akin to a photo book or an exhibition being printed and hung on a wall.
What was the thing that propelled you to self-publish in the first instance? Is it what you just described, that you were keen to make sure that your work was seen in a slow way?
I think slow is good, and I have great memories of picking up storybooks as a kid, and it's before we can read that we're really looking at pictures and storytelling, and it leaves an imprint on us. And so books have always been really important to me, and I've collected thousands now of photo books and artists' books, transcripts, all sorts of different material, dictionaries, old really weird dictionaries. And there's just nothing that can replace picking up a book and turning the pages. And in terms of that storytelling, the ability to play with the idea of, I wonder what happens next at the turn of every page, keeps me so curious, like heightened peak of curiosity in the making of pictures, and then in the ability or the idea of being able to encourage that idea in storytelling within books, within photo books.
Do you see architectural spaces actually as books?
Yeah, I think, for me, the outside of the architecture, again, it's about a life being lived, evidence to suggest a life being lived. And the living rooms, the kitchens that are often connected spaces now, they're kind of like the stage for those lives. And there's something very special about that. And whether that's a very new space designed by an architect and the family or the people have just moved in and they're still trying to work out how to live in this space. Or it might be something more like my first book, Portrait of a House, where the family and the village of people almost at the Brassai house have been there for 50 years, so the walls can talk, and there's something else that happens in a place like that, and the stories that can be told. So houses and our homes are places of shelter and refuge, and where our wounds have the opportunity to be healed, and it's a really important place where stories begin. It's not lost on me when I show up that that I'm there as a witness to observe those moments, even when someone's not there. And often people aren't at home.
Yeah.
They're at their workplace paying off these enormous mortgages that we've been asked to pay, just to be able to live there, or the rent we might pay to be there, to have a home. So often
in your work, it's always lovely to see that we do get the sweeping, expansive outdoor shot. We get the beautiful, styled interior shot. The big money interior shot is always very beautifully curated. But then, I mean, this one from Two Barns, which is Space Studio Architects, the fact that you've included, and please do, anybody who hasn't seen, go to Simon's website, have a look at the projects. Lots of inclusion of like in-between spaces that otherwise might not be classed as the sexiest spaces in a house, but for so many reasons have an incredible importance, not just as like a functional aspect of a dwelling, but simply that this is often a place that is otherwise overlooked as somewhere of value. But you give value back to places and spaces, even when they're already what I think of as high value properties in so many other ways, that you do go to the corridors, or that you do give us pieces. It's not just about personal effects. This is about, again, as you suggest, like walls talking.
Yeah, certainly. And again, for me, this house is a good example of almost any that I might show up to. And for me, it's about arriving early and leaving late. And while a whole day might sound like a long time, it's incredibly brief. And everything is changing. It's in flux the whole time. And so I feel very responsible to be that explorer in that space, in that time, watching and observing and finding moments with the house. And it's as if the house is alive, at that point, with the spaces being either lit artificially, or the aperture of a window working hard to bring light in. And it's a way to explore. It's a way to find what is really in the space, whether there's someone there or not.
I found it very interesting recently. I'm selling my home at the moment, and so like the estate agent sent round a photographer, but before that I spoke to the estate agent at length about the house, and it struck me that the agent came and saw my home for maybe like half an hour, and I was full of it. I was like, oh, but you should see it at night. I've designed, the lighting so that it does this at this time, and then when the light comes through that window, it does this differently. And I realized that to actually like encapsulate the thing that makes somewhere livable and beautiful is about time.
Yeah.
I wish I had a Simon Devitt to come and do my real estate.
I sometimes get that opportunity. It's not all too often, but I have done that
But I mean, you are,
a bit
in terms
recently.
of doing you the service of explaining, if anybody doesn't know
Mm,
the kind of quality of your work. You are featured in internationally renowned publications. You've been in all different kinds of magazines, and um, you are celebrated as somebody who's masterful at their
mm,
craft.
mm. Thank you. That's very kind. Um,
But I would say
yeah.
unconventional at times in your
Mm,
approach.
mm.
So I mean,
Yeah.
I consume huge quantities of printed magazines still. Maybe like one of the only people in the UK who does
Mm,
that.
mm,
And anything that shows me in any kind of architectural magazine something that is about, uh, as you describe, the kind of the life of the place, not just the beauty of the bones of it, but
mm.
the life of it is always very, very interesting.
Yeah, I'm only really led by how it feels to be there. Um, how it looks, the camera will certainly, take care of most of that. But then how it feels to be anywhere is often subtle and suggestive and nuanced and reveals the spirit of a place.
Well, are you not like a medium? You're the conduit. What are you?
Oh, I think in a way, I mean, the pictures are always and only ever a single-minded proposition,
Mm.
my view, at that time in that place. Um, but it's also my view in that time in that place. And it's important that those pictures convey a sense of that place, the
Mm.
spirit of that place. And at that time, by me, I can subtly imbue, how it felt for me. And it's just me and how it felt at the time that I'm cognizant of and want to record.
And you seem to appreciate that in the work of others.
Oh, certainly.
So this is a Meyerowitz shot, Joel Meyerowitz.
Joel's work is just, it's always been a huge inspiration on me. And Cape Light, this book that he made of these pictures in this place, they're just bewildering and beautiful. And page after page, you might see the same or similar um, space, but shot in such a different way. And the moments are beguiling and cause you to look again and look back. And you might turn the page and go, but what happened in that last picture? So you're continually engaged, and um, I love that about his work. And
I'm curious about you. We talked about time, things of transition, but ultimately we are speaking through all of this really about beauty and the sublime.
mm-hmm.
Is beauty a fixed thing, or is it always changing?
Oh, it's part of that greater alchemy of things, isn't it? And I think the last hard-earned layer of beauty is decay, and it's something we're always a lot of us are trying to paint over or clean off
Mm.
or ignore or deprive ourselves of in some way. But it reveals that last hard-earned layer, and it reveals that has proven itself, that place or that space, that it's lasted and it's been worthy and it's been lived in. And so for that reason, I really love visiting homes, for example, where someone might have lived there for 30, 40, 50,
Mm.
60 years.
Well,
There's
you
something
get
really special.
the patination of people, don't you?
Mm,
Does a place ever live beyond its people? Like, obviously, I know structurally, yes, physically, yes,
mm-hmm,
but when you visit places and you make these photographs, do you leave remembering the human feeling, or is there some other aspect that's kind of independent of our personification of space or our anthropomorphization of, you know, we put ourselves into the living of it, because we're alive and we could
Mm-hmm.
live there, and we
Mm.
might, through your work, get a sense of sound or smell or presence. But is there
Yeah.
ever a case to say the building is beyond the human presence?
I think, most of the time I'm called to photograph something new, most of the time. And usually I think the best time to photograph a new piece of architecture is probably 3, 4, 5 years into the project. Things have settled. The homeowner's worked out how to live in the house.
Mm.
There's art that's been created and hung. New memories have been made. The gardens have grown a bit more and the house is settled. I think that's the best time. But it doesn't mean that I'm allowed to wait. Often I'm there at a very early period,
Mm.
and the walls can't talk yet. The memories haven't been made and the gardens haven't settled, and the new and old art hasn't made its way yet onto the walls in many cases.
Mm.
So I'm almost projecting myself at the time into not yet, yes, how it felt to be there for me, but in kind of a curious kid kind of, isn't this amazing, this place at this time,
Mm.
this landscape, this new house.
But that's kind of like a collision of history, isn't it? That's almost like feeling one's way through the entirety of, like, the broader past. I mean that in, I was reading somewhere about, I think it was through your architect's portraits actually, that because New Zealand is essentially a young country, maybe architecturally speaking,
Mm.
that there is this kind of overlap and interconnectedness of the roots of things. Are, it's easy to kind of trace a family tree of architecture in New
Yeah,
Zealand.
it is. Yeah, and a good friend and um, professor at Auckland University, Andrew Barry, it must have been 15 or even 20 years ago now, he actually did the architecture family tree in New Zealand, and it's worthy of being updated, and I'm going to have to harass him about that, because it's his first attempt was quite fantastic and lovely to look at. um, I think all photos are a part of a much bigger conversation, and they're all connected. Um, some we see once and very fleetingly, and others we see more often, and they've kind of time decides how important they are and whether they're viewed again or not. And some photos we look at a lot more than others, and so there's this much broader, bigger, richer, longer conversation between photographs that I really love, and I'm very mindful of whenever I'm, get the opportunity to make pictures. There's a convention with photography, and it's self-evident that, I pick up the camera, I've made that picture in that time in that place, and then I get to share it. More recently, a project, and it's an ongoing project that I'm working on with different architects. It's a much more intimate conversation where the architect and I will decide on an intention or a conversation, and they will then go out with a 35mm film camera loaded with a 36 exposure black and white film, and set about making those pictures based on that intention in that conversation, but at half the ISO of the film itself. So they'll expose it at 200 ISO and of a possible 400. So they're sort of having half the conversation on the film, and then they'll send me that roll of film, and based on our intention and our conversation, I'll go out and make pictures, not knowing what they've shot, but just our intention alone allows me to go out and make my own pictures and shoot over top of what they shot at the other 200 ASA to make the full exposure.
All those relationships between presence and absence
Mm.
are the thing I think that regardless of you being in this space, the gift
Mm-hmm.
to us as viewer is that we don't know the actuality of the space.
Mm-hmm.
The absent part, which is the surround of your photograph, is very swiftly fleshed out, I find, when I look at your work, which is your work has a weird capacity in that way, in that I'm not contained within the image. I come outside the edges of the image.
Mm.
So that absent element, the bit that you might choose, I know you're speaking more about light specifically, but
Mm-hmm.
space wise, psychologically, emotionally, I'm not, I feel enabled to come beyond the image.
Mm.
I just have one more question for you though, because
Lovely
I'm very
reflection.
aware
Thank you.
that you have got a lot to do and you've been, again, generous with your time. We've seen a lot of your work. People will be familiar with your work. If they haven't seen it, go to Simon's website, please. I'll put a link in the YouTube caption for this video. We see the through view. That's what I titled our talk today.
Mm.
But psychologically and emotionally, do you see that you are outside looking in or that you are inside looking out?
I think sitting alongside, inviting people to sit with me is where I sit.
Wow, that
Mm.
is possibly the most beautiful parting comment that any of my guests have ever made. So, Simon, thank you so much. It's been a
My
very
pleasure.
interesting and enriching
I've
experience.
been really touched by your questions and your manner, so thank you. It's been delightful.
Thank you, Simon.